Well, the first cover, you'll notice the aesthetics, the design is less professional. And that was basically because it was me, myself, and I with somebody that I communicated with. I said, I'd like to get the ethos of the sport of baseball and an older card and a newer card. And so that's what I got. And then the other covers that are a little more appealing graphically and aesthetically were designed by our team, where, after it wasn't me, myself, and I got some very talented teammates coming along, especially, in design and everything else. And so but through it all, the first one sold the least, but it got us on the map.
This is in the office, and I know you know this. This is hanging up in the office, and every so often you'll see a Jim Beckett autograph on it. It's such a revered piece of memorabilia, I think, out there, and it still sells on eBay. It's funny to see.
There weren't that many. It was. I would say almost every issue of the baseball, basketball, football, hockey, all the magazines we printed. Maybe almost not even to demand as much as to demand a little bit less. We didn't try to overproduce anything. That's not true of issue number one. Issue number one was completely speculation because, we had some original orders, but did not really know people didn't know what they were missing or what they didn't have. And so the first issue didn't really sell that great. We had some leftovers, but now they're all gone, obviously. But
So from issue number one to issue number two, how fast did it take to catch on when people saw this and saw what they were getting, especially dealers, collectors? Was it a big ramp up from 1 to 2?
Eric, you're so generous with the praise. Not only was it not a ramp up, it was like a drop off for issue number 2.
Really?
and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then it started building up. And then you could see kind of a steady climb. But you'll notice if you stack those, so issues 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 are maybe even tougher than number 1 to get if you go to eBay or some other place. But then it started climbing, and you'll see that part of the climb, again, was the fact that I had some help in the design, and it looked better. It looked better, and probably I was getting better. The team was forming, but yeah, it wasn't a rocket ship. It was. It sputtered a little bit, but I was undaunted. I was doing it as labor of love. So, you can't, I was unsinkable at that point because I was doing it. I still was kind of doing it as a side gig the first couple of years.
I got you. Did you still have the card shop? Is that what as well?
No, the card shop I'd pretty much divested before I got into that, because even when I was doing the annual price guide, it seemed like, I probably ought to be, backing off on that. And so, but the magazines for sure, monthly price guides, that was pretty significant. But again, we only had the one. We didn't have football and basketball and hockey, but I was still doing the books. And then at some point, it just got bigger, and it was sufficient enough that I could start. I didn't take a salary for 2 years. So I just, but brought along really good people, and it came together.
So this is going to get a little bit into podcast talk, but one of those really good people you brought along was Dan Hitt, and you had him on, I believe, last week or the week before. Dan is a numbers guy. You're a numbers guy. Dan is almost like a machine. You put him in front of something, and he gets it done, and he works. I love that about him. But that early team, bringing on good people, that was imperative to the success of Beckett Magazine. Who else was there early on? It was yourself and Dan, and who else?
Well, Pepper was before Dan even.
Oh yeah,
if you remember Pepper, had some overlap with Pepper, who did a lot of the editorial stuff that kind of and managed some of the price guide team. He did and did a lot of grading stuff. Really helped grading get to the popularity it now has. So, my sister Claire, who was just there from pretty much the beginning as well, did everything. What we did in the beginning, and Dan was a good example of this, is that we really, I think, hired people with high integrity, good work ethic, but they were also versatile. And yet Dan, even though he was versatile, he was somebody that I could really trust with football, because he was such a football expert. And of course, I'd known him since he was a teenager, because he used to work in the shop that I was part owner of back in the late 70s.
That makes a lot of sense then to bring him on, to be able to trust him like that. You mentioned grading. When you guys were sitting down and conceptualizing grading and bringing it to Beckett, tell me about that process and like what went into that before the launch.
Well, I think at that point, Mark Harwell was the president of the company, and really had come from a little bit of a coin background, and really saw what PSA was doing, not with envy or jealousy as much as, why aren't we doing that? And so I think I was overly cautious, overly conservative, and probably was listening a little bit too much to critics who would say, well, how can you price the card if you're grading the card? And in reality, so as we batted that around, Grant and Dan were key in that. Wayne Grove was involved in those discussions. Mark Anderson came along pretty early. But like I say, Mark Harwell was kind of messing with the slab and really trying to make sure we had some distinctives, that we weren't just a copycat. But in terms of the grading of the scale and the subgrades and all that, that was Grant and Dan and Mark and I guess Wayne Grove too. So it just kind of came together, but it was, again, not an overnight success there either. We probably contemplated it for more than a year, maybe a couple of years. And then we jumped in. We had a lot of the price guide guys doing the grading because that was the antidote to the criticism. All along, we had been grading cards whenever we were going. I mean, you've been a price guide analyst. When you go, if you're at a show or you're getting, it's incomplete data if you just know the price the card sold for, but don't have any conception of the condition. And in so much of the show sales, it's just a card sitting there. And if you can't assess that, hey, that was in rough shape, that's why it sold for less, or that was pristine and that's why it sold for above what we said the price was last month. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And over time, that was more accepted. But before we did it, people were saying, I don't know if that's a good idea. And I probably bought into that too much.
I understand that. You've been mentioning a lot of names here. Alex has a good question. Just off the top of your head, of the names that you've mentioned, how many of those people are still involved with the hobby that you know of?
Well, a bunch of them are. I mean, Dan is not, but Dan is, even though he's not, I've had him on my podcast. It's like he's never been gone because he's doing home inspections, and he had a long career of really a lot of overtime of doing that. Pepper is not in the industry as much, but he's still a huge sports fan. I've had him on the podcast. Mark Harwell's passed away. I did a tribute episode to him, very worthy of listening. My sister's not in the hobby, but she has her own business and is doing, kind of antiques and crafts and kind of shows with her husband. And then the rest of them work for Panini. What do you want me to say? No, I mean, Grant's at Upper Deck and Tracy Hackler's at Panini. And, it's a small, close-knit hobby, and we had a great team, and I'm glad they've found places. Because Beckett Media is smaller in its Dallas footprint now than it was when I was the guy. It's shrunk. It's still a medium-sized company, but they've reconfigured in some ways. And so some of the guys that moved on have stayed in the hobby, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I want to have high-integrity, hardworking people involved in a hobby that I love.
Right.
So
absolutely.
I don't want them to leave.
Right. And one of those guys, and I'm going to bring it. Can you tell me, I just want to ask this because I love the man now, but Jeremy Murray, can you tell me about Jeremy Murray when he started at Beckett? Because who he is now is just a complete man of integrity. He's a great guy to work for and work with. But what was he like when he started?
He was a diamond in the rough.
Really?
He had a lot of potential, okay? And that potential, I think, has been and is being realized. But again, same thing, with the versatility, the willingness to take on tasks that look pretty tough. I mean, he wasn't shying away from what was hard. He wanted to contribute in whatever way he could. And that's the kind of attitude, at least when I was in charge, that allowed people to get ahead. You've told your hobby origin story and how you got into Beckett Media and the movement within. Is that, once you get in, then the people hopefully are finding out what your best talents are and moving you around to your place of maximum value. So I'm happy to see Jeremy's success.
Yeah, Jeremy's a great guy. This is a great question here. Robert wants to know, do you still price cards in your own collection? Do you still take time to sit down and price a card?
Of course. But not academically. First of all, was the question you just asked me before, was that from a Jay Murray?
No, it was Mr. Murray is actually on vacation, so I know
he's back. He's back. I actually had an interchange with him today. Okay, so your question was what? I'm sorry.
Do you still price cards?
Do I still price cards? Yes, I do. But again, not academically.
You're a numbers guy? Why
I mean, I'm not doing it for fun. I mean, basically, when I got a small account on ComC a number of years ago, and that in the early days when they had a tie-in with Beckett Media, and so when you went to price your card that you put up on ComC, it would tell you what the OPG price was, and you could say I want to be that price or a little more, a little less, whatever. And so I'm not saying I was lazy, but I just that was so I wasn't really pricing cards as much as I was just kind of going by my history, my memory. But then that went away. And when that went away, I thought, now I've really got to price my cards. Mm-hmm. And so I found out that even though I've forgotten some things, there's a lot I haven't forgotten. And I certainly have forgotten what's tougher and what's easier. And so I price a little more by feel. I'll occasionally look something up, but most of the time I'm kind of winging it. And so what I've learned from ComC is that if you price it too low, that is it's gone.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
gone. And if you price it too high, it sits here. And so then
Right.
you're paying storage. And that's kind of what I'm doing. So in that mid range of cards where I send stuff to ComC, it's kind of fun to see what sells and what doesn't sell. And so if I were going to do a price guide now, I'd have a pretty good feel for at least all the stuff that I'm sending to ComC, which is, a certain kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. With that being said, what are you collecting now? Has your collecting pattern changed at all, or do you still like the stuff you liked back when this started?
Well, before it started in the 70s, I was like everybody else. I was trying to complete sets. And so, but again, once you get all the sets of the sets that people used to go after in those days, and then instead of going beyond that, I kind of got into the price guides. And so I kind of stopped collecting in that way and just kind of put my stuff on hold. And I frankly even sold some stuff long ago just to not have it. But and Rich has talked about this. I kind of thought, if I'm going to do price guides and we're really going to be comprehensive, we want to be the leader in the industry, I ought to get some type cards, because putting prices on cards you've never seen and putting them in an almanac or some other price guide where you don't even have a copy of the card, it's just, so Rich and I, especially Rich, when we were at the Nationals, if we saw something we didn't have, and they weren't super expensive in those days, but we'd pick up a copy of something that we hadn't seen. And so so my long answer is I became more of a type card collector. All along, I've loved Clemente and I have a few local players that I kind of make sure I have enough to be able to show somebody if they come over. And you've seen, I have a little bit of a wall of fame where it's one card per player, so it's not a lot in depth. If somebody really wanted to see more of something, I could dig them out. But, most people don't want to see 1,000 different of a certain card.
Right.
And I don't have 1,000 different of everybody, but I probably have 1,000 different Emmett Smiths. I'm not even sure Emmett would want to see 1,000 different Emmett Smiths.
That's true. Although Emmett might be that one rare guy who understands.
Actually, he would want to pick them up and take them to his parents' card shop.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going.